You're watching the Forefront Church video podcast. And wherever you're at viewing online, we just want to say thank you and welcome. And one of the ways that we can help connect with you is we want to hear from you and where you're at and how we can help. And so head over to forefrontchurch.info after the message and click the Connect tab. It's a great way for us to help you along your spiritual journey as you connect with God and learn about Jesus. And so sit back, relax. We hope that you're challenged and encouraged from today's message.
How much does it cost? We ask that question about all kinds of things. Think about it for a minute. After church today or somewhere during your week, you might have to stop in the store and pick something up. So you have this list of items in your head, or maybe you're like me and you have a list and that's what you're going to go get. And so you're in the store and you're walking around and you're adding things up as you go. Like you generally know what things cost, but in your head, you're thinking about it. Okay, it's this plus this plus this. You're kind of running the calculator. You're asking, how much does it cost? Maybe you're going to buy a house. That's a big, big investment. There's lots of costs associated with that. You want to know exactly what each item is going to cost so that you can determine whether you can afford the house or not. How about a car? If you buy a car, new car, used car from a private seller, it doesn't matter. What you want to know is, does that vehicle's value match what it costs? So you're trying to figure out exactly how much it costs. If you have children, how much it costs is like, there's like a chip that gets implanted in you when you have children so that whenever they run up to you in the store with something in their hands with that death grip and they say, I want this, you immediately say, how much is it? All right, like you're already on the defensive. It's like a ninja weapon. How much is it? Because you're going to tell them no in a minute and crush their little hearts. But there are some things that are more complex as we go through the life cycle where we start to ask about the costs of things. You may want to enter into a relationship with another person. You want to get married. There are costs to that. There's relational costs and financial costs and all kinds of things that you take into consideration. Maybe there's an occasion for you to end a relationship. There are certainly costs associated with that are not just financial. You may find yourself at some point having to have somebody move in with you, like an elderly parent. That happens a lot when they get older and they're no longer able to take care of themselves. You might have to move them in. So you want to think about, what are the costs to that? Because it's certainly a financial cost, but there's probably a cost and level of effort and things that you need to do. You want to think about that. What about your own health? Something that might have to happen to you that you may have to make a decision on whether you're going to pay for that or not, or put it off or whatever. There are costs based on what you're able to absorb. There are a lot of animal people who struggle with what to do when a pet is ailing, an elderly pet or a pet that gets really, really sick, because you're emotionally attached to that animal. So now what is the cost? And if you've ever had an animal before, you know when that point comes where you have to make that decision, it's oftentimes excruciating. But what we're really after is not necessarily how much it costs. The real most important question is, what are we really willing to pay? See, the cost of it is only really the first part of it. Our willingness is really what's important. And we are willing to absorb costs for all kinds of things. Think about it for a minute. We will absorb the cost of rooting for a really bad pro sports team. We'll wear the jerseys, go to the games, tell everybody they're going to win, and they are nowhere near winning, okay? We'll follow college teams like that. We'll follow our kids' sports teams like that. We will travel all over the eastern seaboard with that child to make sure that they're going to become the greatest soccer player in the world. We will absorb the cost for that. We will donate to causes that have our beliefs or our best interests at heart. We will willingly do that. We will willingly pay our tolls, fees, and taxes. You might go, oh no, I do not willingly pay that. I'm going to push back on you a little bit. You pay it, and the willingness derives from the fact that you do not want to pay the fee, you don't want to be levied the fine, you don't want to get arrested for not paying it. So there's a little bit of willingness there. We will willingly wait 2 days for Amazon to deliver something to our house that we could get in the car now and drive 10 minutes to the big box and pick up. We all do it. We will go all the way to Disney World to wait in line for 90 minutes to ride a 3-minute ride. See, willingness is the measure of what we will follow. There's a threshold for all of us. It depends on the situation and the thing. What are we willing to follow? How about the reason we're here? Following God. What is it like to follow God? What is your willingness level for that? What does it look like? What does it mean to even follow God? If you're new here, or you don't really understand God, and you're hearing this, God is not just something you believe in, it's a entity, a divine, universal God. It's something to follow. What does that look like? If I said there was a way to follow God, would you buy into that a little bit? Maybe, maybe not. Is there a way? Is there a best way, a wisest way? There certainly is. If some entity like God loves us and cares about us so much, there must be a way. And there is, because here's the truth. From a sports team to the most sacred or the most serious, we will only follow what we are willing to follow. Evidently, we must be compelled in order to buy into something and actually follow. So what I want you to hear today is that willingness is the key here. Our willingness to follow comes at a cost. It doesn't matter what it is. Something really, really awesome, something not so great, somewhere in the middle, the benign, the generic, doesn't matter. There is a cost to everything that we're going to follow. And we are continuing our series today, Jesus' Most Confounding Statements, and we are going to look at a statement in a writing called Luke that is a head-scratcher, right? We've been looking at statements that Jesus made. We're like, wow, that's pretty blunt, that's very weird, that's kind of mysterious. And we're going to look at one today in this writing of Luke in chapter 14, and it's going to deal with following. It's going to deal with willingness to follow him and what that looks like. And but what we do every week is we go to the Bible to mine out that teaching. When we write this series, we're looking for those statements that are sticking points, that are hard, that are weird. And so we go to the Bible every week, and we pull out these truths and we teach about them. And if you don't have an easy-to-read version of the Bible, you could go to the Get Connected table in your Get Connected area in the lobby, and we have some free, easy-to-read versions of the Bible. If you're catching us online, you can get great digital versions of the Bible as well. And you can also go to forefrontchurch.info. That's kind of our digital hub. And I put a whole bunch of notes on what we're going to talk about today that has everything you're going to kind of need to follow along here. And if you ever have a question about anything, you can certainly hit the Connect tab there, and we would love to hear from you, because these are important topics. These are very interesting, but they're also sometimes complex and confusing, and we want to eliminate all of that. Before we go any further, let's pray. God, thank you so much for today. Thank you that we can come here, we can learn from you, we can deal with the difficult, we can try and figure out what you're saying, but most of all, what we're trying to figure out is how we can become a closer resemblance of you, that you want to change us and form us to become better, to follow, to love, to be just something that the world needs to see that is not the everyday, that they would look at us and go, man, you're so loving and caring. How do we get there? So whatever anybody needs to hear today, I pray that you would speak to us and help us through this. We love you, and we pray this in your name. Amen. So we're going to be in this writing of Luke, and Luke is one of 4 people who wrote the story of Jesus. If you go to the New Testament, you have the Old Testament and the New Testament. If you go to the New Testament, the first 4 writings or books are written by guys like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they wrote about Jesus. The basic truths and the basic facts about Jesus' life, you can find them in all 4. The miracles, the interactions that he had with people. But each one of those writers had a little bit different way that they went about it. And Luke is interesting because Luke is very interested in the spiritual formation of people that would come to follow Jesus. And that's just a fancy way of saying, hearing what Jesus has to say and going, He loves us. He cares about us. He died for me. I'm going to follow that. So Luke was very concerned about discipleship, and it's just the idea that we would come to be a follower of Jesus, that we would become a student of him, and that when that happens, not only would the time at which Jesus was there be enhanced, but Luke was interested in future generations all the way through eternity, that the story of Jesus would be found in people who would come to follow him. Why is this important? Because when we make a choice to follow God, when we make a choice to pattern our lives after Jesus, things change about us. We become a person who listens to what he has to say. We begin to change the way we go about life. When things come up, we choose God's way instead of our own way. We start to adjust how we see and engage the world, hopefully for better, and we become loving, kind, unselfish. And so this is the kind of the theme or the thrust of Luke's approach to the life of Jesus. So when we arrive in chapter 14, this is what Luke is going to help us to understand. And it's largely Jesus speaking through most of it. And in the first bunch of verses, we find Jesus in the house of a Pharisee. Now, a Pharisee was a religious leader of the day. They very strictly adhered to religious doctrine. They were all about rules. They held themselves in high esteem. They thought they were kind of better than everybody else. So they wanted honor. They wanted rule following, but they were never really good at the things that Jesus was about, which was love and compassion and kindness. So Jesus spends the first verses of Luke chapter 14 in this engagement with them, and he's trying very nicely to show them their hypocrisy, show them their selfishness. He's calling them to humility. He's calling them to selflessness, and it's not really working out very well because they're very intimidated by Jesus. They think they're all that until Jesus comes around. They know that what Jesus says is true, which is why they become very obstinate and they kind of close themselves off and they don't want to hear about it. So it doesn't matter whether you're in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there's always this opposition, this push-pull going on between Jesus and the Pharisees, because Jesus is speaking for God and in a way that the Pharisees can't see because they're kind of caught up with themselves. So we have that interaction, and we get later on into chapter 14, and Jesus is beginning to try and unpack or teach us things about following. So he uses story to tell us how to follow. He creates this visual for us of a banquet, of a real fancy meal that everybody is invited to, but people make excuses to not go. Just like we make excuses to not do things. Jesus is saying, here's God, here's his life, here's an amazing life with him, and it's like a banquet, but yet people are making excuses to not go. So you can kind of catch the context here, is that Jesus is concerned. Luke is writing of Jesus' concern for the future, where we're at. How come more people aren't kind of jumping into this? What's happening here? There's an amazing gift of eternal life and love and peace. Why are not more people picking up on this? And so we're going to land right in the middle of it in verse 25, and this is what it says. It's up here on the screen. You can follow along. It says, large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said. All right, before we get into what he said, let's look at what large crowds mean. Think about large crowds when you see them. Something either really good is happening or something really great is happening. If the westbound lanes are completely packed because you can see an accident in the eastbound lanes, the reason it's packed is everybody's slowing down to see the accident, right? So we look at crowds a lot different. We look at it different ways. Sometimes we look at a crowd and go, that's a good thing. Sometimes we look at a crowd, we say that's not. But the number gets us curious, right? We look at our bank account with a lot of zeros. We're very, very happy. We're all doing our tax returns right now. Some of you are really happy. Some of you are not very happy at all, and we won't talk about that. But the big number makes us happy. Your kid brings home a great grade. You're all about it. It's good. Jesus doesn't look at numbers like this. He's pretty unimpressed because he knows in the context of his experience with the Pharisees, with regular people that are walking around, that in any given crowd, there are going to be people who are only there for very superficial and selfish reasons. They really have it. Some of them would have no opinion whatsoever about why they're there. They're just with the crowd. Some people are following because it just seems like a good thing, but he knows that they're going to fall away later. There are other people that are following, and they're completely committed to it. Jesus remains unimpressed. The crowd is there, but this is what Jesus knows about every one of us. He knows our hearts. He knows where our willingness is. He knows what we're going to do. And then we get to verse 26. And this is the most confounding statement that we're going to look at today. So I'm just warning you. You ready? Here we go. Verse 26. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father, mother, wife, children, brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. I tried to say it as fast as I could. That's hard. Let's interpret what it means just on its own. Jesus first, always, always, always. Foundational, complete commitment to him. And when you do, you can become his disciple. A disciple being a follower of a teacher or a philosopher. Okay. But if you're like me, you're stuck on that H word, that hate word. I don't know a lot of people that like the word hate. When I read this verse, I hear my mom when I was a kid. We don't use that word in this house, mister. We don't like the word hate. It hurts. It's harsh. It's rough. But there's things we hate. If you were to think about it seriously enough, there's things you hate. Me? It's cold meatloaf. Where are my cold meatloaf people? Just love cold meatloaf. All right. Cold meatloaf. When I was a kid, meatloaf night. Leftover meatloaf. Guess what it was going to be in the next day? My school lunch with ketchup. Oh, you all are with me. 8:30 wasn't. Thank you. Oh, I hated it. Here's the deal. If cold meatloaf with ketchup were the only thing that I could eat for the rest of my life, I would find a way to eat it. Because when I say I hate cold meatloaf, I'm using hyperbole. Hyperbole, the definition of it, is an extravagant exaggeration. You know who's great at hyperbole? Children. Children are hyperbole generators, right? When have you heard this? You're the worst parents ever. Which, that usually comes around when they're in middle school, and you're like, well, you're not wearing a diaper, you clothed yourselves, you made a meal, you ate, you were able to form a full sentence. I think I'm doing pretty good as I got you this far, kind of thing, right? Or they say, I'm starving. Here was my favorite. There's nothing to do. I see the way kids use tablets. There's plenty to do, right? And then when they get to be teenagers, they yell, I hate you. What are they doing? They're uncomfortable. They're trying to prove a point. They're trying to tell you something. They're exaggerating it because they're trying to get their point across. And this is what Jesus does in this verse. What he's saying here is nothing supersedes a foundational commitment to God. Your superficiality and your selfishness is not going to get you there. Complete commitment. And then in kind of a 1-2 punch, we get to verse 27. And he says this, and whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. It just gets better and better. This is really hard. So a cross is the implement of Jesus' death. They tacked him to it and killed him with it. And now he's telling us, not only do we need to place him first, we need to love everything a little bit less than him, but now we get to pick up his cross. Why? Why would we have to worry about that? Because we're going to experience disappointment and disillusionment and some rejection and people that are not going to be about making a commitment to Christ, that life can be kind of difficult for us. He wants to get it out there, and he's starting to paint a picture for us that there is a cost involved here with this living a life with God. And it's a hard one. And we all understand estimates. We understand costs. Like if you need to get your roof done on your house, that's an expensive cost. You're not going to just let anybody do it. You're going to get some estimates. You should. We all understand that. We want the best price, so we have a number of people look at it. Maybe you have to get your car fixed, a major repair. You need an estimate. We understand this, and so Jesus teaches this to us beginning in verse 28. He says, look, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it. For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he's not able, he'll send a delegation while the other is still a long way off, and will ask for terms of peace. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. Just like anything that we're about, anything that we follow, there are considerations. He's wanting to make sure that we understand these costs, the considerations. Why is he doing this? Because he wants us to follow. He wants us to follow willingly. He wants us to follow with God as first, always. Now, you might be sitting here and go, this is really hard, and it's a little depressing. I mean, I thought God said he loves us. He absolutely does. I thought Jesus came to save us. He absolutely did. And when he did that, he presented us with an opportunity, a free gift, that when we accept it, when we decide that God is the only thing that I'm going to follow, that when we begin to act in that, when we begin to pay the cost of that, it's not in payment to God because he was just so nice to give us that, so we need to pay him back. It is a response because of this amazing, massive gift that he's giving us. He's saying, man, commit to that. Be the absolute best at that possible. Because his love is free and it's for all. So let's look at it like this. Let's think for a minute. What if somebody came up to you and said, I will pay for your education. Whatever you want to be. I don't care what it costs. I will pay for your entire college education. Think about that. Let's say you never went to college before, and you maybe didn't get through high school. I don't know. And now you have an opportunity to become a student, to become anything that you want to be. And you go, I want to be a doctor. Okay, that's kind of pricey, but paying for it. You're going to be a doctor. We will pay for everything. Well, I don't really have a high school diploma. I dropped out. We'll get you your GED. We'll get you through anything that it costs. We'll pay for it. You need a place to live. You need a car to drive. You need a new computer. We'll pay for everything. You want to be a doctor? I've always wanted to be a doctor. I've just never had the money to go do it. I just want to save people's lives. I want them to be well. Okay, it's paid for. And so you get to go to school. And you sit through class after class after class. And you go to anatomy class and you learn and you memorize and you take courses and you write papers and you take quizzes and you fail one here and there, you don't get a great grade at something, but you know what? I want to be a doctor. I'm going to give everything to it. So you keep going and you take your tests and your exams and then next thing you know, you're an intern. And now you're starting to practically learn how to become a doctor. And you're doing it, man. You're in there. You're studying, you're learning, you're growing, you're changing, you're transforming. You're starting to look like a doctor. Then you get into residency, and you're like one of the 8 people in white coats that stands behind the real doctor when we have an appointment with them. You're not really one yet, but you feel good. You got the coat on. You're in residency. You're starting to get it. And then the next thing you know, you've studied so hard. You've worked for years. You've gotten all of this done. The next thing you know, you're sitting for your medical boards, and you become a doctor. You're a doctor now. You're going to save lives. It's been completely paid for, and now you've poured in all this effort to become a doctor, and now you are one. And you know that because you're a doctor, you know that it's lifelong learning after that, because the medical field is always advancing. Like you have to stay on it, so you are committed to lifelong learning to become the best doctor you can be because lives are on the line, and you want to save them. There was a huge cost to you getting there. Your willingness was to sit in class after class after class after class, and you missed time with friends, and you weren't able to have a meal with your family sometimes, and you missed some things, and you weren't able to binge watch whatever it is you like to on Netflix. You never looked at your family in the world and said, I hate you, I don't want anything to do with you. You understood, they understood that there was a cost that you were going to be willing to pay to become the best possible physician that you could become, and you sat in that classroom to transform and be. And this is exactly what Jesus is saying when he talks about us being students of him. Luke talked about the importance of being a disciple, of sitting in that classroom, lifelong learning to follow Jesus. This idea of hating mother, brother, sister, all of that, I want you to think of this. I want you this seared in your memory, this visual. It means we become a student and we sit in that tough spot like grief and mourning and difficult relationships and what do I do and why are my kids the way they are? I was talking about this concept with our family ministries director, Becky Bruner, and she actually inspired this visual when she said that when I'm going through a rough time or I'm not quite sure what God is saying or I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to be doing with God, I have this visual of a school desk and I'm sitting in it and I'm letting God teach me and I'm letting him show me and I'm letting him move me through. There's lots of life classrooms that we have to sit through. Unless you're in kindergarten, chances are you're not going to jump up out of a school desk and run away and go, no, I don't want to do this. You hang in there, and you sit in it, and you walk through it, and you move through it. This is exactly what Jesus is asking us to commit to. We talked about the education of a doctor. I'm talking about the sanctification of a disciple. What does that mean? Sanctification is just a big church word that means we're going to be transformed and changed for God's purpose and design. That we would open ourselves up to sitting in this moment. And that is really the crux of what verse 26 is telling us. What verse 26 and 27 are saying, will you willingly sit in my classroom for the rest of your life and commit yourself to be more like me? There's a writer and a teacher, pastor, minister, late 1800s, early 1900s. His name was Oswald Chambers, and he tragically died of a ruptured appendix when he was 43 years old in the early 1900s, and his wife compiled all of his writings in a book called My Utmost for His Highest. And the theme of this writing is exactly what it says, giving our very, very best, our very, very greatest effort and submission and commitment to God. And in this book, he talks a lot about sanctification. It's a kind of a daily devotional read. It's very, very popular. It goes by day. It's just an awesome way to kind of get an idea as to what God might be after in our walk with him and living it out. And on the February 8th day, he talks about sanctification and its cost. And he says, are we prepared to pay the cost of sanctification? The cost will be a deep restriction of all our earthly concerns. Sounds very much like a commitment to high-level education. And an extensive cultivation of all our godly concerns. What's the most important thing? Those godly concerns that then move us through life. He says sanctification means being made one with Jesus so that the nature that controlled him will control us. And that it will absolutely cost everything in us which is not of God. He would say God's purpose, God alone, always. And it brings us back to what we asked kind of near the beginning, that our willingness to follow comes at a cost. He saw that. He wrote about it. We understand it when we look at Luke in this manner and what he talked about in verses 26 and 27. So what do you do? How do you do this? I think the very first thing that you do is you commit to go into class, to commit to becoming a student of his. If you're taking a time out every single day, making it the most important part of your day where you say, this time is going to be carved out where I'm going to sit and I'm going to have a conversation with God and I'm going to read. Maybe I have an extra copy of this. Whoever wants it afterwards, come and get it. But reading through that and taking time to talk to God and asking him, God, I want to be your student. I want to commit to you. I don't care what the costs are. That's what I want to do. And it's also practicing it like you do medicine. And being prepared for a tough case and a tough situation. You know what doctors don't do? Doctors rarely panic. We hear a lot about, a lot of people say, I really didn't like that doctor. He had a really poor bedside manner. And I'm like, yeah, I get that. But if I had to choose between competency and bedside manner, I'm going to choose competency all the time. What does a really great doctor do? They find what's wrong with you. They diagnose you. And what do they lean on? They lean on their training. They lean on those years of being in the seat. They lean on that residency. All of the stuff that they need to make a proper diagnosis. They don't go with emotion. They don't run off without any sort of guardrail on how they're going to do it. This is the same thing that happens when we become students of Jesus, when we commit to him. When those difficult things happen, we sit in the seat, we lean on God, we look at what's in front of us, we seek out the wisest course of action, and we walk in that. There was a pastor by the name of Francis Schaeffer who lived early 1900s, and he wanted to become a pastor. And he grew up in a non-Christian home, and he was getting ready to tell his dad that he wanted to go to college. His dad said, I don't want you to go to college, and I definitely don't want you to be a pastor. So it got to the point where Francis Schaeffer had to make the decision of whether to go to school or not, and he had to tell his dad. And it was a non-Christian home. His dad was an atheist. So he goes down in his basement, and he says, I would not recommend doing this, but this is what he did. He pulled out a coin. He said, God, please tell me if I'm supposed to be a pastor. I'll pick heads. He flips a coin, and it comes heads. He goes, God, I'm going to flip this coin again. If I'm supposed to go to Bible college and become a pastor, make it tails. Bing, tails. Third time. All right, God, one more time. Make it a, and it was heads. And he goes up and he tells his dad, I have to be a pastor. I have to go to college. And his dad got very, very angry with him. And his dad said, on his way out, as he slammed the door, I will pay for your first semester. Years later, his dad becomes a follower of Jesus. And Francis Schaeffer marked that day, that moment, as the day that when he made the decision to make God first, he would always follow God from there on out. So you don't know the impact or the influence that you might have on somebody's decision someday. When you're in the middle of following God and it's tough and you're making tough calls in the way you conduct your life and live your life, and there are people that are not about it, you have no idea how you may impact them. And that really, even though it's a cost, it's something that you need to put into perspective. Because when it comes down to it, we come right back to what we said at the very beginning, which is, what are you really willing to pay? The cost is one thing, but where is your willingness? All I can tell you is that it is absolutely worth it. Because the love that God has for you, the care that he has for you, the desires that he has for you, what he sees for you in your life and your family, and this short period of time that we get to be on this earth is absolutely incalculable. There is no limit to that. So follow willingly, whatever that cost is. Let's pray.
Thanks for tuning in to the Forefront Church video podcast. Our hope and prayer is that this has left you encouraged and challenged you in your faith. And you might have some questions and some ways that you want to figure this out, and we want to help with that. Head over to forefrontchurch.info, and there's a couple different ways that you can connect. Click the Connect tab and let us know how we can be praying for you, or a staff member can be contacting you this week. Maybe you have just been encouraged by this and want to support the ministry here at Forefront Church. You can click the Giving tab, as well as other tabs that are in there to help you along in your journey with God. And so we're thankful for you. Thanks for tuning in, and we cannot wait to see you again here online on the video podcast. We love you, and we'll see you then.